Before we start, if you enjoy the story, please leave a like and check if you're subscribed. The first thing Jonas registered was the smell, antiseptic and metallic, underlaid with something organic he couldn't name. The second was the restraint across his chest, smooth and unyielding, holding him flat against a surface that hummed with low-frequency vibration. He opened his eyes to harsh white light and a ceiling of dark metal veined with lines that pulsed faintly, like capillaries carrying luminescent blood. His head felt stuffed with cotton, thoughts moving through sludge. Medical scans. He'd been scanned, probably down to his genetic markers and neural patterns. The cargo run had gone sideways fast. Kethran patrol ships appearing out of nowhere near the contested zone, weapons hot before he'd even registered them as hostile. He dumped velocity and burned lateral, putting his hauler between them and the civilian convoy, buying the transports 30 seconds. They shouldn't have needed if the Kethrans had actually been there for him. Apparently they had been. The restraint released with a pneumatic hiss. Jonas sat up slowly, testing his limbs. Everything worked. No pain beyond the dull ache of a stim crash hangover. The cell was small, maybe 3 meters square, walls the same dark metal as the ceiling. No visible door, though a seam suggested where one might iris open. He'd expected worse, interrogation, a beating, maybe a bullet. The Kethran Empire didn't have a reputation for hospitality. The seam split vertically, panels retracting into the walls with mechanical precision. She stepped through and Jonas forgot to breathe. He'd seen images, intelligence briefs that were probably propaganda, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of her. Pale skin that seemed to catch and hold the harsh light, smooth as polished bone. Hair black as vacuum, falling past her shoulders in waves that moved with liquid grace. The horns rose from her temples in elegant curves, polished crimson that gleamed like fresh blood, tapering to points sharp enough to kill. Her eyes found his, red, vivid red, the color of warning lights and arterial spray, and held without wavering. Behind her shoulders, wings folded tight against her back, black feathers edged with crimson, the membranes beneath suggesting powerful musculature. She wore armor that hugged her form. Black metal worked with intricate patterns that were both ceremonial and functional, protecting without concealing the dangerous elegance of her frame. She moved into the cell with predatory grace, each step deliberate, and Jonas realized his heart was hammering against his ribs. She'd notice. Those red eyes were already cataloging every physiological response, every micro-expression. "Your heart rate is elevated," she said. Her voice was lower than he'd expected, resonant and precise, each word shaped with formal care. Respiration increased, pupil dilation consistent with fear response. Jonas met her gaze, forcing himself not to look away from those burning eyes. Or appreciation. Her expression didn't change, but her wings shifted fractionally, feathers rustling. Appreciation. "You're beautiful," he said, in a way that makes it hard to tell if you're about to kill me or commission a portrait. That got a reaction, barely perceptible, a narrowing of her eyes that might have been confusion or irritation. She stopped 2 meters away, studying him with the intensity of someone dissecting a specimen. "I am Valindra Kess, strategic analyst for the Kethran Imperial Command. You are Jonas Tam, registered cargo pilot with the Human Coalition Merchant Fleet. Your ship was engaged in contested space 17 hours ago." "Jonas is fine," he said, "and that wasn't contested space when I entered it. Your patrol ships made it contested. Our records indicate reckless maneuvering that endangered 3 Kethran vessels. Your flight pattern was erratic and unpredictable." Jonas laughed, couldn't help it. The sound felt wrong in the sterile space, too human and too loud. That's a terrible way to get honest answers. Valindra's head tilted fractionally, a gesture that would have been bird-like if birds had horns and predators' eyes. "Elaborate. You walk in here looking like a nightmare wrapped in elegance, tell me I'm reckless, and expect what? That I'll apologize, beg?" He leaned forward, forearms resting on his thighs. "If you wanted intimidation, you've got the aesthetics down. But if you actually want to understand what happened out there, maybe try asking instead of accusing." Her wings flared slightly, just an inch, before she controlled them. Jonas filed that away, wings as tell, involuntary response to irritation or surprise. "Very well. Why did you maneuver your vessel into the engagement zone rather than retreating to safety? Because there were 17 civilian transports in that zone. Family haulers, colony ships, a medical frigate. I put my ship between them and your patrol to give them time to scatter. That is not documented in our tactical records. Jonas rattled off the registry numbers from memory, 17 alphanumeric strings without hesitation. He'd memorized them during the run, habit born from too many years hauling refugees and supplies through hot zones. You remembered the people you saved. You remembered the ones you couldn't. Valindra's expression remained neutral, but something shifted behind those red eyes. I will verify this information. You do that. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the grit of dried sweat. While you're at it, ask yourself why your patrol was even there. That sector's been quiet for months. We had treaties, shipping lanes, the whole diplomatic dance. Then suddenly you show up guns hot, and people die. Seems like someone wanted that outcome. You suggest our command initiated hostilities without cause. I suggest that I was hauling medical supplies and emergency rations to a colony station when your ships appeared and started shooting. Draw your own conclusions. She was silent for a long moment, those burning eyes searching his face. Jonas held her gaze, refusing to flinch. He'd learned early that showing fear to predators, human or otherwise, only made things worse. You do not behave as our intelligence predicted humans would when confronted with Kethran forces, Valindra said finally. Most species find our appearance disturbing. Most species probably haven't spent half their lives in deep space where disturbing is relative. He gestured at her wings, her horns. You look dangerous, sure, but I've seen vacuum exposure, reactor failures, and decompression injuries. Beauty and danger aren't mutually exclusive. Her wings shifted again, that same fractional movement. My assignment is to assess whether humanity represents strategic value or existential threat to the Empire. Your species is deemed emotionally unstable, prone to irrational decisions driven by sentiment rather than logic. And you're the one who decides which category we fall into. I will compile evidence and present my findings to Imperial Command. Jonas studied her. The rigid posture, the controlled movements, the way she held her wings tight against her back as if afraid they might betray something. He'd seen that kind of restraint before, in soldiers who'd been taught that feeling anything was weakness. Here's some evidence for you, he said quietly. I could have run. I had velocity, a clear vector out of that engagement zone. But I stayed because 17 ships full of families and wounded were sitting in the crossfire. People who run calculations before helping someone usually calculate themselves right out of doing it. Something flickered across Valindra's face, gone too fast to name. She turned toward the door without responding, her wings spreading slightly as she moved, black feathers catching the light. I will return when I have verified your claims, she said. The door irised shut behind her, leaving Jonas alone with the hum of the cell and the ghost of crimson eyes burned into his vision. Valindra reviewed the tactical data 3 times before accepting what the records showed. Every trajectory Jonas had described matched perfectly. 17 civilian vessels, their transponder codes matching his recited registry numbers, all maneuvering away from the engagement zone precisely when his cargo hauler had positioned itself between them and Kethran patrol ships. Each of his seemingly erratic burns had been calculated to draw fire to buy seconds that allowed families and wounded to scatter into safe vectors. She sat alone in her quarters, wings spread across the meditation platform in a posture she only adopted in private, and replayed the recording of their conversation. His words echoed in the small space. People who run calculations before helping someone usually calculate themselves right out of doing it. The statement unsettled her in ways she couldn't categorize. It suggested that action without complete analysis could be valid, even superior. Her training rejected this premise. Her instincts, buried under years of conditioning, whispered otherwise. She returned to his cell the next morning with authorization she'd spent 2 hours justifying to her superiors. Observational study in varied environments, she'd written. Assessment of human behavioral adaptation under controlled exposure. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. She wanted to understand him. Jonas looked up when the door opened, expression shifting from wariness to something that might have been relief. He'd been doing push-ups, she noted, utilizing confinement time for physical conditioning. His shoulders and arms showed defined musculature, body adapted for labor rather than just piloting. Sweat dampened his shirt, dark hair tousled. "Your claims were accurate," Valindra said without preamble. "All 17 vessels were present and maneuvered as you described." He stood, rolling his shoulders. "Did you expect me to lie?" Statistical analysis suggested a 73% probability of exaggeration or false memory under stress. "And now? Now I have questions that cannot be answered in this cell." She gestured toward the corridor. "You will accompany me. Remain within 2 meters. Deviation will result in immediate restraint." Jonas moved into the corridor beside her, matching her pace naturally despite the awkwardness of the restriction. They walked through sections of the military installation she'd chosen specifically: observation decks, training facilities, administrative sectors where Kethran efficiency operated at peak display. He was silent for the first 10 minutes, taking in his surroundings with the same careful attention she'd observed during their first conversation. When they reached the observation deck overlooking the primary hangar, he finally spoke. "No one talks to each other." Valindra followed his gaze. Below, maintenance crews serviced patrol craft with practiced precision, each member moving through their assigned tasks without verbal communication or physical proximity beyond functional necessity. Efficiency requires minimal distraction. Personal interaction is reserved for off-duty hours. And during off-duty hours, we pursue individual improvement, physical conditioning, tactical study, meditation protocols. Jonas turned to face her, and she found herself caught in his direct gaze, dark eyes searching. "Do you ever get tired of pretending you don't feel things?" The question struck like a blade between armor plates. Valindra's wings twitched before she controlled them, but not quickly enough. She saw his eyes track the movement, cataloging her involuntary response. "That question is inappropriate," she said, voice level despite the acceleration of her pulse. "That's not an answer." She should have terminated the excursion, should have returned him to his cell and filed a report about human psychological manipulation tactics. Instead, she heard herself say, "Feelings are not relevant to strategic assessment." Maybe that's the problem. They continued the excursion in silence, but his question followed her back to her quarters that evening. She pulled up the recording again, watching her own micro-expressions, the wing movement she hadn't meant to make, evidence of the weakness her training was designed to eliminate. The next excursion came 3 days later. She'd told herself it was protocol, necessary observation, but she'd requested it within hours of receiving authorization for the previous one. This time, they walked through the residential district, where off-duty officers maintained quarters identical to her own, efficient, minimal, designed for rest and preparation, rather than comfort or personalization. They passed a training courtyard where a junior officer stood at attention while her commander delivered reprimand for emotional compromise during a tactical exercise. The officer's wings were pulled tight, head down, accepting the public correction without protest. Jonas stopped walking, tension radiating through his frame. "What did she do?" he asked quietly. She hesitated during a simulated engagement when presented with civilian casualties. The hesitation cost her team tactical advantage. She hesitated because people were dying. Simulated casualties. The exercise was designed to test decision-making under ethical stress. Jonas's jaw tightened. And caring about civilian lives is a failure? Valindra watched the scene below, feeling the familiar weight of doctrine and duty. Emotional attachment to abstract entities compromises operational effectiveness. She must learn to analyze without sentiment. Or she'll end up like you. The words weren't cruel, but they landed with physical force. Valindra turned sharply, wings spreading half an inch before she caught them. "You know nothing about what I am." "I know you're tired," Jonas said, voice gentler now. "I know you hold yourself so rigidly that your shoulders are always tight. I know your wings move when you're surprised or angry, which means you actually feel those things even though you've been trained to suppress them. and I know that watching that officer get punished for having compassion makes you uncomfortable, even if you won't admit it." She wanted to refute him, wanted to detail the logical fallacies in his assessment, the projection of human emotional responses onto Kethran psychology. Instead, she found herself explaining. "This is the only framework I've known. Structure, duty, discipline. These principles create order from chaos. They've made the Empire strong." At what cost? The question hung between them as they resumed walking. Valindra didn't answer, but her mind wouldn't release it. Back in her quarters that night, wings spread in the privacy of meditation, she acknowledged what she'd been avoiding. Jonas was right. She was tired. Tired of control, of suppression, of performing strength that felt increasingly like brittleness rather than resilience. Their fourth excursion came 6 days after his capture. They were being transported between sections when the carrier hit unexpected turbulence, a maintenance fluctuation in the gravity stabilizers. Jonas reached across the narrow space instinctively, his hand closing on her armored forearm to steady her. The contact lasted 3 seconds. His palm was warm even through the metal, grip firm and unhesitating. Valindra didn't pull away, didn't reprimand him for the breach of protocol. When the turbulence settled and he released her, she could still feel the pressure of his fingers, the ghost of human warmth against her skin. That evening, she received new orders from Commander Vrath Sorin. Her assessment period was concluding. She had 3 days to deliver her final recommendation on humanity's strategic value or threat classification. The decision would shape policy, potentially justify expansion into human coalition space or establish grounds for diplomatic coexistence. She informed Jonas the next morning, expecting him to plead or bargain or rage against the injustice of one person determining his species' fate. Instead, he looked at her with those steady dark eyes and asked, "What do you actually believe? Not what your orders require, what you believe." The question terrified her because she no longer knew the answer. That night, unable to sleep, Valindra accessed classified intelligence files to compile her report. 3 hours into the data review, she found communications she wasn't supposed to see. Exchanges between Commander Vrath and covert operations officers, discussing manufactured provocations and false flag attacks designed to create justification for territorial expansion into human space. The engagement that had captured Jonas wasn't defensive response to human aggression. It was deliberate instigation, civilian casualties, acceptable losses in pursuit of political pretext. Her hands shook as she copied the files to secured storage, the tremor visible even in the dim light of her quarters. Everything she'd been taught, every principle she'd built her identity upon, was constructed on calculated deception. She thought of Jonas asking what she believed and realized she finally had an answer, one that would cost her everything she'd ever been. Valindra returned to Jonas's cell at dawn, the evidence stored on a data chip that felt impossibly heavy in her palm. She'd spent the night reviewing the files again and again, hoping to find alternative explanations that would allow her to file the report and continue her ordered existence. None materialized. Jonas was awake, sitting on the edge of the sleep platform. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw in her face made him stand immediately. "What happened?" She played the communications without preamble, her voice steady despite the tremor in her wings that she no longer bothered hiding. He listened in silence, watching the data scroll across the projection, his expression shifting from confusion to comprehension to something darker. When the final file closed, he didn't speak for several seconds. "How many died?" he asked finally. The provocation operations resulted in 417 confirmed casualties across 6 incidents over 8 months, Kethran and human. And it was all theater. His voice was flat, controlled, but she heard the rage beneath it, not at his captivity or interrogation, but at the lives traded for political convenience. People died so your commander could justify a war. Valindra's wings mantled despite her attempts at control, spreading and folding in agitation that would have horrified her superiors. "I don't know what to do with this information." "You report it, you expose what they did. To whom?" "Commander Vrath controls the intelligence apparatus. My direct chain of command is complicit. If I transmit this evidence through official channels, it will be suppressed and I will be eliminated for possessing it. Jonas moved closer, stopping just outside arm's reach. So you file it away and pretend you don't know? Submit your report and let them keep killing people? I am asking what choice I can make that doesn't destroy my career, my family's standing, potentially my life. The admission felt like tearing out something vital. Everything I am exists within the structure of the Empire. Without that, I don't know what remains. Maybe that's the point, his voice softened, to find out who you choose to be when duty and conscience pull in different directions. She wanted to explain that courage was easy for someone raised in a culture that celebrated emotional conviction, that his people built identities on feeling and choice while hers constructed them from service and obedience. But standing there with evidence of orchestrated murder burning against her palm, she couldn't make the justification hold. If I act on this, I become a traitor. If you don't, you become complicit. The truth of it settled into her bones. Valindra looked at Jonas, at the man she'd been assigned to assess as threat or asset, and made her choice. I'm getting you out. She forged transfer orders during the shift change, exploiting her security clearance and the Empire's faith in procedural compliance. By the time anyone questioned the documentation, they were off the installation and burning toward the border on a requisitioned courier ship. Valindra piloted with her wings spread for balance, every nerve alert for pursuit that would eventually come. Jonas sat in the co-pilot seat monitoring sensor arrays. Where are we going? Neutral station on the border. Dr. Amira Okonkwo maintains a medical facility there, treating refugees from both sides. If anyone has additional evidence of the false flag operations, it would be her. You've thought this through. I've committed treason. I prefer it to be effective treason. The station appeared 6 hours later, a converted mining platform that housed medical bays and temporary shelters. Dr. Okonkwo met them in a secure room away from the main facilities, a woman in her mid-40s with dark skin and silver-streaked braids, her brown eyes sharp behind practical glasses. Jonas, she said, relief evident, we thought you were dead. Close enough, he gestured to Valindra. Valindra Kess, Kethran's strategic analyst. She has evidence you need to see. Amira's expression shifted to wariness, but she reviewed the files without comment. When she finished, she pulled up her own records, medical documentation of weapon signatures on human civilian vessels that didn't match any registered combat engagements, injury patterns inconsistent with the reported circumstances of various incidents. We've been documenting discrepancies for months, Amira said, but without proof of intent, it was dismissed as confusion in contested space. This evidence connects everything. They spent hours cross-referencing data, building a case too comprehensive to suppress. Valindra worked with mechanical focus, refusing to acknowledge the reality of what she'd set in motion. When Amira excused herself to arrange secure transmission protocols, Valindra remained at the terminal, staring at the accumulated proof of her government's calculated cruelty. Her hands shook. The tremor started small, barely visible, but grew until her fingers couldn't maintain their position on the interface. She stared at them, these traitor hands that wouldn't obey, that insisted on displaying the weakness her training had spent years eliminating. Jonas's hand covered hers, warm and solid and steady. He didn't try to still the shaking, just let her feel his presence, his acceptance of her unraveling. I've never chosen personal conviction over duty, she said quietly. My entire identity has been constructed around service to the Empire. Without those constraints, I don't know who I am. Maybe that's the point. He turned her hand over, his fingers threading through hers, to find out who you choose to be. She looked at their joined hands, his darker skin against her pale palm, the physical evidence of connection her culture taught her to avoid. Jonas reached up with his free hand, moving slowly enough that she could stop him if she chose. When she didn't, his fingers brushed one of her horns, tracing the curve with surprising gentleness. The intimacy of the gesture cut through defenses she hadn't known she was maintaining. Kethrans didn't touch horns casually. The gesture was reserved for family, for bonded pairs, for those trusted with vulnerability, that he understood the significance without being told, that he offered it anyway, broke something in her that had been cracking since she'd first met his steady gaze. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "of what comes next, of losing everything I've built, of discovering there's nothing underneath the armor." "There's you underneath," Jonas said. "Whoever that is, whatever you choose to become, and you're braver than you think." Valindra's wings spread involuntarily, the gesture her species used to signal trust and openness. She'd held them tight for so long that the stretch felt like freedom and exposure in equal measure. Jonas didn't flinch from the display, didn't look away from her red eyes or the horns that marked her as other. He simply held her hand and let her be afraid. The proximity alert shattered the moment. Amira's voice cut through the intercom, urgent and clipped. "We have incoming. 3 Kethran military vessels, military-grade signatures. They're hailing for immediate surrender." Valindra moved to the communication terminal, pulling up the tactical display. Her training read the formation instantly. Precision assault configuration, led by a command ship she recognized from countless briefings. Commander Vroth had come personally. The transmission opened before she could block it. Vroth's face filled the screen, his burgundy eyes cold and calculating. "Valindra Kess, you are charged with treason, conspiracy, and theft of classified intelligence. Surrender the human and return to custody. We can frame this as coercion. Claim you were manipulated. Your family's reputation can be preserved." She looked at Jonas, at the man who'd seen through her armor to the person she'd hidden even from herself, and knew what her answer would cost. No. Valindra transmitted the compiled evidence to Thyra before Vroth could jam their communications. Her sister's position in the communication directorate gave her access to dissemination networks that would spread the files faster than tactical suppression could contain them. The message was simple. Broadcast everything. Protect yourself. Forgive me. The station shuddered as Vroth's forces began breaching protocols. Valindra grabbed Jonas's arm, pulling him toward the maintenance corridors that honeycombed the converted mining platform. Amira moved ahead, her knowledge of the facility's layout crucial as pressure doors sealed behind them and emergency lighting painted everything in amber. "They'll cut through those doors in minutes," Jonas said, breathing hard as they descended a vertical shaft using maintenance grips. Then we move faster. The first Kethran strike team caught them in a junction between sectors. Valindra's wings spread instinctively, lifting her above the initial volley, while Jonas rolled behind environmental processing units. She dove, using altitude advantage to strike from above, her combat training, executing movements she'd practiced thousands of times. Jonas improvised with anything available, loosening pressurized coolant lines, triggering emergency bulkhead releases, using the environment as weapon and shield. They fought their way through 3 more teams, their tactics complementing each other without discussion. Where Valindra's precision created openings, Jonas's adaptability exploited them. Where his improvisation bought seconds, her aerial mobility transformed them into advantage. She'd been trained to operate independently, to view partnership as liability. Fighting beside him felt like discovering a missing component she hadn't known she lacked. They reached a service corridor where emergency shutdown protocols were rebooting life support systems. Jonas slumped against the wall, chest heaving, blood streaming from a graze across his shoulder. Valindra knelt beside him, her hands already assessing the wound with practiced efficiency. "It's shallow," she said, though her voice carried an edge she couldn't quite control. "I've had worse." He caught her wrist gently when she started to stand. "Wait." She waited, wings folding partially around them in the cramped space, creating privacy from nothing but feathers and shadow. "I've spent my entire life believing strength meant isolation," Valindra said, the words emerging without permission, "that allowing myself to need someone was weakness. But watching you protect people despite personal risk, seeing you choose connection over safety every time, taught me that courage isn't the absence of need. It's acknowledging it anyway." Jonas's hand tightened on her wrist. "You gave me something, too. Proof that choosing to feel doesn't make you weak. It makes you whole." The understanding that passed between them required no additional words. She helped him stand, and they continued toward the emergency docking bay where their courier ship waited. But Vrath had anticipated the destination. The commander stood in the docking bay with a full tactical squad, his scarred wings spread in display of dominance, weapons trained on every approach vector. Valindra and Jonas emerged from the access corridor with hands visible, but she felt the weight of what came next settling into her bones. "You've made your choice clear," Vrath said, voice resonating across the space. "A traitor's death, then, unless you reconsider." Valindra stepped forward, her wings spreading to their full span. Black feathers shot through with crimson, magnificent and terrible in the harsh docking lights. She activated her command override, broadcasting on every open frequency in range, ensuring her voice reached every ship, every station, every listening post within the sector. "I am Valindra Kess, strategic analyst of the Kethran Imperial Command. Under military law, I invoke my right to public testimony regarding matters of strategic deception and unauthorized military action." Her voice carried absolute authority, years of training focused into this single moment. "I possess documented evidence that Commander Vrath Soren orchestrated false flag operations resulting in 417 deaths across both Kethran and human populations, designed to manufacture justification for territorial expansion." She transmitted the files as she spoke, flooding every channel with evidence that Vrath couldn't suppress fast enough. Communication networks lit up across the sector, ships breaking formation as commanders demanded clarification, as the political firestorm she'd ignited spread faster than weapons fire. Vrath's expression remained cold, but his wings twitched with barely contained rage. "You've destroyed your family, your career, everything you've built." "I've chosen authenticity over acceptance," Valindra said. "I've chosen truth over comfortable lies. And I've chosen to become someone worthy of the trust placed in me." Other Kethran commanders were already transmitting demands for investigation, for stand-down, for answers that Vrath couldn't provide without further implicating himself. The political machinery she'd set in motion wouldn't stop until the conspiracy was fully exposed. Vrath could kill her, but the truth would survive. The standoff held for 3 heartbeats before Vrath's communication officer informed him that High Command was demanding his immediate return for testimony. He withdrew with his forces, leaving Valindra and Jonas in the docking bay, alive, but irrevocably changed. The court-martial took 6 weeks. Valindra faced commanders who'd shaped her career, justified her choices before tribunals who viewed emotion as weakness and duty as absolute. Jonas remained throughout, a steady presence in the observation sections, his dark eyes offering silent support when protocol forbade communication. Her testimony dismantled Vrath's operation piece by piece. Other officers came forward with their own evidence once the political protection crumbled. By the end, Vrath faced execution and Valindra received discharge with notation. Not quite honor, but not quite disgrace. Everything she'd built her identity upon was stripped away, leaving only the person she'd chosen to become. In the aftermath, with tensions between species easing but not resolved, Valindra and Jonas worked together as liaisons. They translated not just language, but the deeper emotional and cultural frameworks that had kept their peoples apart, teaching others what they'd learned through necessity and choice. Jonas's ship was repaired 3 months after the trial concluded. They stood in the cargo bay he'd once loaded with medical supplies and emergency rations, simulated sunset streaming through the viewport, painting everything amber and gold. "You could stay on the station," Jonas said. "Continue the liaison work from there." "I could." Valindra moved closer, her wings folding partially forward. "Or I could travel with you, learn what it means to choose my own path instead of following prescribed ones." "It won't be easy. Your people still view you as a traitor. Mine don't fully trust you. We'll be navigating prejudice from both sides." "I've navigated worse." She reached out, initiating physical contact for the first time outside of necessity, her hand finding his. Her fingers interweaved with his deliberately, the gesture carrying weight her species reserved for profound commitment. Her wings spread and curved forward, enfolding them both in an embrace Kethran's reserved for bonded mates. I'm still learning how to want something for myself rather than duty, she said quietly. But I know I want this, want you, in whatever form our different biologies and cultures allow. Jonas's free hand rose to her face, fingers tracing the curve of her jaw before moving to her horn, that intimate gesture he'd offered once before. Then we'll figure it out together. No calculations, no protocols. Just us choosing each day. Valindra leaned into his touch, her red eyes meeting his dark ones without armor or pretense. Outside the viewport, stars beckoned with infinite possibility. Inside the cargo bay that smelled of metal and hope, two people from different worlds began writing their own story. One choice at a time,